Hello, everyone. Welcome into our webinar hosted by the American Public Human Services Association, also known as APHSA, in partnership with Lyssn. Today's webinar topic is Beyond Traditional Learning, Innovative Motivational Interviewing Skill Development for Transforming Family Outcomes. We can go to the next slide. So my name is Francesca Robinson. I'm an instructional designer with APHSA, and I'd love to just take a few moments to share a little bit about who we are and the work we're proud to do alongside of our members. So at APHSA, we represent human services agencies at the state, county, and city levels from across the country. We're a bipartisan organization dedicated to building common ground and generating practical solutions that work for people and communities. Next slide, please. So we aim to advance the well-being of individuals, families, and communities through three core channels: influencing modern approaches to sound policy, building the capacity of public agencies, and connecting leaders to accelerate learning and generate practical solutions. Our vision is one of thriving communities built on human potential. Next slide, please. And while we're on the topic of staying connected, I just want to make sure everyone is aware of the APHSA conferences that we're hosting in 2026 in Arlington, Virginia, New Orleans, Louisiana, Spokane, Washington, and Salt Lake City, Utah. You can go to the event page at aphsa.org throughout the year to learn more about these conferences, including when registration is, keynote speakers, and the different sessions that'll be at each conference. And then next slide, please. I also want to share that APHSA offers a career center, which is a dedicated job board and talent marketplace designed specifically to connect professionals with career opportunities across the human services sector. It serves as a valuable resource for individuals seeking new roles, advancing their careers, or just exploring opportunities within the sector. And then before I turn it over, just a few housekeeping items. So as you probably noticed, this webinar is being recorded. That recording will be circulated shortly after the event to everybody who registered. And then during this webinar, we are requesting that you put your questions for our presenters in the Q&A feature. The normal chat feature has been disabled for this webinar, so you'll definitely want to make sure you're using the Q&A. Our panelists will try to type responses to as many as possible live, but they'll also have time to answer questions live throughout the presentation. So with all of that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Ashley Johnson.
Hello and welcome, everyone. If you continue to the next slide, that'd be great, please. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm with the Coalition for Family Children Services here in Iowa. I have the lovely job of supporting our child welfare providers with training and implementation of MI into our child welfare system. I'm really excited to moderate today's conversation with two incredible motivational interviewing experts. It's been a joy to work with them, and today we'll explore how motivational interviewing can transform interactions with families in human service settings, how innovation approaches to skill development. Lovely thing that I'm super excited that they're going to talk about is this microlearning and practice-based learning, which we have used here in Iowa, and we've seen great success out of it, and just how to help our professionals build those MI skills in ways that are more accessible and sustainable. So I'm going to give Reyna and Mary the opportunity to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Reyna.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Reyna Puentes, and you can find me in El Paso, Texas. And I am the clinical AI lead at Lyssn. I've been with Lyssn for a few years now, and we'll be sharing more about what our company does. We're very excited to share with you my biggest passion, which is motivational interviewing. I've been a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers since 2018, and that's where I met Mary. So Mary, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so lovely to be in such good company today. My name is Dr. Mary Hodorowicz. I go by Mary. I use she, her pronouns, and I am beaming to you today from Baltimore, Maryland. So it's so cool that so many people in so many different places can be together. I work at the University of Maryland School of Social Work, and I am a researcher, a teacher, and I do a lot of motivational interviewing training. And also, as Reyna said, member of the Mint.
Thank you so much for having you guys join us. So I'm going to start off with Reyna today. For those who are maybe newer to motivational interviewing, could you start by grounding us in what MI is and the core principles that guide this approach?
Yes. So if you've heard about motivational interviewing before, welcome back to this world. If this is your first time, we hope to give you just a little bit of an introduction of what motivational interviewing is. One of the ways I like to describe it the best is that motivational interviewing is a way of talking with people when you're in a sort of helping relationship. So, you, by the nature of the work that you do in health and human services, you may agree or disagree that you're in some type of helping relationship with people, with families, with parents, with caregivers. And you're likely finding yourself trying to help them make some positive changes in their day-to-day lives, in their behaviors, in their parenting or their child rearing, right? All of these topics that make up human behavior in the work that you do. So motivational interviewing is really how you help in those conversations. It gives us some theoretical foundational understanding of like where motivation comes from and why we work in this way. I'm not going to go too far into that today. We're going to talk more about the practical components today, which really mean it's about listening and how you show that you're listening. And when we're helping, it's about how we're helping, the particular types of questions that we're asking, or particular statements that we're making, like reflections or affirmations, which we'll talk about more later today, that really help you, the helper, navigate conversations in your work in a way that really empowers the people that you're working with to feel motivated to make these changes and take them on because you're talking with them in a way that's centered around their own motivations, the person's own reasons, their values, their goals. And it's collaborative in that nature as well. So I've just thrown a lot of core elements of motivation interviewing, which we're going to keep talking about today. And Mary's going to talk next about the research behind motivational interviewing because that's one of the things that really why we get so passionate about this. Because, like I said at the start, it's a way of talking with people that is backed by research. So everything we're going to share today, there's some research underpinnings that support these strategies that we're going to share with you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Reyna. I really appreciate how you said help navigate conversations to empower individuals and that collaborative approach. So thank you for sharing that. And then I would love to pass it off to Mary. And so she can kind of tell us a little about how the research behind this and why it does so well for our families.
Yeah, so what we know about MI is it is very well researched. There are thousands and thousands of randomized controlled trials that demonstrate the efficacy of motivational interviewing. Randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of science, meaning that for me, we know beyond the reasonable doubt that this causes this. I won't get too into the weeds with that because sometimes when I talk about research, people, it's like nap time. It's like a good white noise or brown noise. If folks have specific questions, you can feel free to pop them into the chat. But what I will say is there's thousands of randomized controlled trials demonstrating its efficacy, and its efficacy is so strong that our federal government made a decision several years ago to fund both training in MI and the implementation of MI, particularly in areas of health science and human services. And that evidence is so strong, and we've seen that it's been so helpful that that funding is standing strong, even in an age where we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of budget cuts in the health science and human service area. And so that to me is the strength, really demonstrates the strength of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research into the how of MI. Like, how does this MI thing work? So in motivational interviewing, what we have learned is that the more somebody talks about why they want to change, their desires, their abilities, their reasons, their needs, the more they talk about that in a conversation, the more likely they are to actually make that change. The more likely they are to reduce the substance use, to follow through with the treatment plan, to accomplish the goal, to show up for the visit, to do the doctor's office. So the way we structure a conversation, as Reyna was saying, the more we structure a conversation, ask questions about that change, reflect that change, the more we affirm somebody's efforts, the more likely they are to actually do it. And the converse is actually true, which is kind of scary. And I look back at my early career, and I'm just like, I was helping people stay stuck in the mud because I was super empathetic and I was caring, but I would spend all this time listening to people vent about the problems, the barriers, the challenge. And they left interactions with me feeling really validated and supported, but they didn't move forward. This particularly happened to me. I was working in a residential treatment center for youth who were females, and I would spend session after session. They would just kind of like complain about their situation, their circumstances, lots of things, and I was super helpful, super supportive, very empathetic, but I didn't guide to change because I always sat in the sustain with them. But back then, I didn't know what sustain was. So I'm going to share with you all what is sustain. Sustain is anything that supports the status quo, reasons why people can't change, the barriers, the struggles, why they can't do it. So when we ask people like, well, why couldn't you do that? Or what are the struggles? Or talk, in that area, the more that we evoke the defensiveness, the more we are basically supporting them and staying stuck. So, what's really important is the way that we structure conversation, what we ask, what we reflect, what we sit in, actually can statistically increase the likelihood that they're going to change or not change. So, a little bit of a tip, our first maybe micro learning op here. If you want to support change in someone, converse with them in a way that gets them to talk more about their desires, abilities, reasons, needs, and then affirm that. Think about how you feel when you're affirmed. Shoulders back, chest out, smile on, versus when you're like being lectured or told that you need to do something, like physically you shrink down, kind of dark, deeper, like, very less motivated. So that's kind of the nutshell of the how of MI and what you can do to support that how.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really enjoyed how you said, the more someone talks about that they're wanting to change, the more likely they are to change. We've seen that here in Iowa. The more that we engage with our families, they're more willing to open up and share, and then we're seeing successful outcomes from it. So thank you for sharing that research tidbit, because we definitely are seeing that here in our practice. So one of the things that we really struggled with in Iowa is this idea of MI and like, how do we do it in everyday practice that makes sense to our providers, our people in that direct line worker that's doing this work. So I was just wondering if we kind of talk about some of those common barriers practitioners might face when they're looking to implement MI and put MI into practice, and just maybe give them some helpful tidbits to kind of successfully do it.
Yeah. I have a few that come to mind, and I'm curious to hear, Mary, what else you could add. So one of the things that first of all, I hear you, right? Like the work that y'all are doing out there in people's homes, in your offices, doing that groundwork. There's a lot going on. I remember one of the first home visits that I did. I thought I was walking in there to do a job, right? To talk with a mom about her baby and their child development. And then there's a dog, and then there's a cat, and then there's the cousins that are over, and there's so many things going on. It's like, how am I going to focus on practicing motivational interviewing when I have so many things, right? And then I have my agenda, my to-do list, all these things. So I just want to start off by saying, I hear you. There's a lot going on. You oftentimes don't know what you're walking into, and you're going in with your best, right? And that space that you create for the families that you work with is a lot of times what keeps them opening their doors to have you coming back. So I want to start off by saying you're already doing a lot of really good work, and motivational interviewing isn't meant to override what you're already doing. Actually, the research has found that when there is a program that already works well and has good outcomes, and you add motivational interviewing strategies to it, those outcomes are improved even more. So I like to think about it as like one more tool that you're adding to your already very well-equipped tool belt. And that tool is just going to be there for you to use in practical moments. Sometimes people feel overwhelmed, like you said, Ashley, like, how am I going to implement this from beginning to end in my conversation? That sounds overwhelming. So one tip that I could recommend, and feel free to take it if you like, is to focus on one skill that you really want to practice in the next visit, in the next day, in your next week, and really just try to focus on that one skill rather than taking on the whole motivational interviewing book all at once. For some people, they might be already really good at affirming. Like Mary was saying, like some people are really natural at those affirmations, but they struggle when it comes to asking open questions for change talk. So that might be a particular skill that one person individually saying, I want to take away and practice that. For other people, they're really good at giving information and solutions and ideas, and they're wanting to practice how to do that in a motivational way by, for example, asking for permission before sharing those ideas, and by checking in afterwards, asking the person what their thoughts are. Those skills that you can learn in an MI training that you can just focus on practicing the next time you want to give information. That's actually been shown by research to help you, the learner, feel more confident in your skills. So you can walk away from that home visit and be like, I shared information the motivational interviewing way. I noticed how it worked. And I want to go tell my supervisor and I want to go do it again, right? And so that is more encouraging and uplifting rather than trying to take the whole book on at once and practice all the ors and get all the change talks all at once. So that's just one idea that comes to mind. Mary, what do you think?
So many great ideas. I love it. What to build off of for there. So, first thought, again, like validating like so much there's so much to do in health science and human service work, and many folks already have more things to do and not enough time to do it. And so kind of really, really validating that. And also, two truths in both hands, recognizing that MI does take a little bit of time, but as Reyna said, not a lot of time. So thinking, so a challenge is the time. So where to fit it in, because it's not nothing, right? But it also doesn't have to be like a 6 hour or 12 hour workshop ongoing forever and ever that people feel like they're carrying this heavy backpack of burden, like gotta carry the MI, gotta do the MI, gotta learn the MI. So an idea that a lot of folks have found helpful is integrating skill practice in ways using tools such as Lyssn that we'll talk about later, but also in like staff meetings. Staff meetings are often very administrative. You can take 10 minutes to do a round of MI skill development, such as there's a reflections batting practice game that people like that's really fun, or putting people in pairs for, again, 5 to 10 minutes to practice those open questions of evoking. So that's one idea, is just set aside 10 minutes in a staff meeting to do that skill practice interaction. What folks who have done this have found that it actually builds the relational component of the team too. Like we get time to talk with each other while also practicing those MI skills. So that's a great benefit. And that's an idea to try. Another idea, and this one has a couple components, but I'll share, is there's often a misconception of what MI is or what MI isn't. And that leads to a lot of struggles with implementation. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the misconceptions and just feel free to kind of think about these and think about if this was a misunderstanding, how might you think about moving forward based on this? So one misconception that we often see in MI and human services is people think that MI is engagement. MI is engagement, but it's also supporting change. If you're just engaging, you're not actually doing the part of MI that the evidence shows leads to change. So MI is engagement plus evoking change talk. Another common misconception is that you can't use MI when there's any type of safety risk. This is untrue. Yes, if there's imminent danger, you're not going to use MI in that moment. Just like if a house is on fire, you're not going to be like, oh, who put that, who set the fire? You're not going to ask a great open question. You're not going to offer a reflection. Oh, that fire's really hot. You're going to put the fire out. And yet, often, even though there's a safety risk, if in that moment, in those 10 minutes, 20 minutes, there's not an increase in risk, and there's not imminent risk, you can use motivational interviewing. Another misconception is the pendulum swinging the other way. People think you can always use MI. Like everything's a nail and MI is the hammer. We're just going to MI this. You can't always use MI. MI is really helpful when people are ambivalent and there's change needed in a clear direction. But some situations, you wouldn't use MI for. So learning about where MI fits best can be really helpful, because oftentimes when I hear people say we're struggling to implement MI and I say, tell me a little bit more about that, they're trying to fit MI in situations where it doesn't fit, and you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. Another misconception is that it's only helpful with one-on-one and parents or in situations where workers have like very long-term interactions. What we have found is that MI can be effective in one interaction in as little as 20 minutes. And so don't be discouraged if you're, an interviewer or you're doing investigations, or you may only have one or two interactions, or you're like, oh, I have a 60-minute session, but I have 50 minutes worth of content I need to go through. You can have a motivational conversation in a very short period of time. Um, so those are kind of some common misconceptions that can lead to some struggles that with a little bit of increased understanding and thought and thinking about how you could work through this best where you are in your agency, you could kind of smooth the path a little bit.
Thank you, Rena and Mary, for sharing those. The one skill to practice, that's definitely something that we've worked with at our agencies. And we've also seen the great success of practicing in staff meetings. I had someone share with us this morning that that's what they do. They pull up a skill, watch a short little video in their practice, and they say that their staff are feeling more comfortable with it. So, and definitely the misconceptions. I think a lot of those, when I first walked in those, I thought those things. So thank you for sharing those. And so then the next kind of topic I wanted to go into is, Reyna, the work that you do at Lyssn, I think is so fascinating and so interesting. And so I just wanted you to kind of tell us a little bit more about your role and how technology and coding and how that strengthens our MI practice that we do every day.
Yeah, so every time I have to start with a disclaimer and say I first learned motivational interviewing in graduate school through research. So I didn't even learn it as a clinician. I was studying to be an LPC, but I first learned it for my thesis, which was research. And so I came through the back door. What I like to say is learning motivational interviewing. And that's really what I'm practicing daily now in my work at Lyssn. So at Lyssn, one of the big components of what I do is I'm a human coder, which means we listen to interactions between clinicians and the people they work with. And we basically evaluate, we code, we assign a behavior to each thing that comes from the clinician's mouth. Every question we identify, was it an open question? Was it a closed question? Every reflection that comes out, we identify, was it simple? Was it complex? So it's pretty in-depth work. But through this work, what we've been able to do is build this AI database, a machine that has learned the difference between simple and complex reflections, the difference between simple and complex affirmations, what a closed question looks like, what an open question looks like, so that learners who want to learn motivational interviewing can come to our online self-paced learning programs, go through a module learning about reflections and reflective listening and affirmations, that being the skill they want to practice on. And they have some vignettes where they can practice the skills over and over again in the safety of your own office without having your supervisor watch you or be intimidated by having to perform in front of your peers. And you can get some feedback, some accurate feedback on those skills. If you asked a closed question, it's going to give you feedback on asking an open-ended question. So I get super passionate about this work because I've been a trainer in person, and I know what it's like to have a room of 40 people, and there's people that have different learning levels. Some people are grasping it quicker than others. Some people feel intimidated to practice, to raise their hand, to say, their attempt out loud for fear that it's not going to be perfect or right. And what the programs at Lyssn do, and programs like Lyssn that enable you to practice your skills and get feedback in this way, is it boosts your learning as a practitioner that you can take to your conversations with families and the people that you work with. And so there's learning, there's feedback, all of which have been found by research is needed to keep sustainable motivational interviewing practice. Even those of us that consider ourselves experts in motivational interviewing, like I'm by no means an expert, and I've been doing this since 2018. I still need feedback. And I'm still sitting here wondering, is there a better way I could have asked that question? Because that's really what coding allowed me to learn. I was able to see the direct impact of what happens when a provider asks a closed question to gather information versus when the provider asks an open-ended question about the person's desires, reasons, abilities, and needs. Those two conversations end up going a very different trajectory. And that's because of the behaviors that the clinician does in the interaction. So as you can tell, I get nerd out about this a lot because it's very exciting for me. It's really impactful too to see a learner go from one session asking more closed-ended questions, not using a lot of reflections, then they get some feedback. They go and they practice the MI skills, and then they feel not only that they're getting better at the skill, but they see the benefits from the people they're working with. It's very positively reinforcing.
Yeah. I think the one thing that when we were looking at, how do we do this? How do we do this work? One of the reasons that we love Lyssn and how we did it is the accurate MI coding. Like all of the conversations are coded to what it actually is, that skill that somebody's working on. And so I think that really helped improve and show us this will help with skill improvement. It's accurate coding. Somebody's going in there in the back end and coding all these conversations. So when our people are practicing, they're getting instant feedback that's accurate and coded by someone who knows what they're doing. And that's one of the reasons we went. So I didn't know if you wanted to kind of elaborate more on the accurate process of that MI coding and why it's so important to the platform and how to get that feedback.
Yeah, it's super important, right? Because people could go away from an MI training thinking, oh, I'm doing reflections. Yeah, I'm asking open questions. But when we get really specific into looking at the type of reflection, right? Like, was it a simple reflection or was it a complex reflection? Was it a reflection of change talk or was it a reflection of empathy, like Mary was saying, right? Because some folks are really good at reflections for empathy. And then, like Mary said, we're not seeing that conversation go farther. So with that detailed coding, we can see you're doing lots of good reflections. And yet there's not a lot of reflections for change talk, or you're asking lots of good open questions, but there's not a lot of questions for change talk, or you're providing lots of information, but we're not seeing lots of affirmations happening. And so that level of coding to be able to say, you know what? I thought I was doing an affirmation by saying, I think you're doing a great job by keeping up and showing up to your appointments. You might not know this, but that's actually giving information. You're actually giving your personal opinion because you're saying, I think you're doing a great job. So what Lyssn could do through the feedback is say, drop the I think and make it about the person. You're doing a great job by showing up today. And that is an affirmation that by what research says is much more likely to empower the person to continue doing those behaviors versus the I think you're doing a great job, which might sound nice. And there certainly might be a place for that type of statement. But if you agree, it sounds more like your personal evaluation. And at the end of the day, it can become more of the person ends up doing things to please me, which is not what we want at all, right? It's not about I'm proud of you. It's about you're doing a lot of things to be proud of. So
Thank you.
we get that specific. And when it comes to language, language is really specific, and that's how specific we can get. And it's some of those things that learners take away and say, I never thought about it that way. I thought because I'm showing up to help that I could just give information and they're ready to take it. But when we give some feedback about try asking for permission before and then check afterwards, that type of feedback, people in the moment, how could somebody know, did I ask for permission or not? I forgot there were so many things going on, right? So that type of feedback, the specific type of feedback can make for meaningful small changes in conversation.
Yep. I've been guilty of that. I've definitely said, I see you doing good work. And so, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Just something to think about. So this is probably where we'll spend most of our time in the part that I'm really super excited to kind of share and walk through and get Mary and Reyna's thoughts on. So these new approaches to learning MI skills, traditional alone isn't enough to keep that sustained skill development. And so this idea of microlearning and best practice learning for helping professionals. So I just kind of wanted to talk about how this approach is changing skill development in HHS. And I know, Mary, you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom on this, on how can we help providers with micro sessions, micro learning, micro tidbits versus traditional all this day, just to get them to learn and practice that skill development.
Yeah, I mean, so much. There's so much that could go into that. I will try and be short and succinct so that it's sticky in your memory, because that's something that's really important that Reyna alluded to, is that people learn differently. there's all different types of way that people learn. There's different learning levels. You often have different learning levels in MI. And so something that allows people to engage in a way that's meaningful to them is really, really helpful. And we also know that people can get really saturated. People are overwhelmed, particularly in health science and human services. So doing things in bite-sized ways can make it less overwhelming. And there's a parallel process, more motivational. So, so I've done a lot of what I feel really lucky. A little bit of a backstory. I'm really passionate about this work because it supports the change of people and because I actually had bad experiences in learning when I was younger. And so I'm excited that now, as part of my work, I get to research how people learn best. I was not a strong student, C's, B's, rarely A's, often guilted, shamed, things that do not lead to strong educational outcomes. And yet I'm very happy to say and confident to say I've earned a PhD. I can confidently say I'm a smart person. I just wasn't necessarily being taught in a way that was helpful for my learning. So what I learned about myself and what I've learned a lot about other people is there is an experiential component to learning, a particular, and we need to teach to that and need to recognize where somebody is. So first off, with motivational interviewing, we need to come from a framework of adult learning. People need to be taught where they are. The second thing is MI is a complex set of skills learned over time. And so we need to move through that in a way. So much like, I often give this example, much like we wouldn't put a bunch of teenagers in a room, for an hour and talk to them about how to drive and then hand them our keys. We just wouldn't do that. People look at me and I'm like, oh, let's talk to these teenagers for an hour about driving and hand them our keys. And people are like, no, 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 we can't do that. Well, why can't we do that? Because talking at them for an hour about how to drive isn't going to give them the ability to get in the car, put the key in the ignition, put it into drive, navigate. That's an experiential skill component and it needs to occur over time. So we know that people start out as novices. They need rules, they need guidelines, they need structure. Then we know that people kind of become advanced beginners. They have the rules, they've had a little bit of practice, they're starting to apply them. And then we know that to become competent, one thing people have to do, and this is hard for people, is they have to try and fail. They have to try and realize, ooh, I could have done this differently, or there's a better way to do this. Just like Reyna said, ooh, you did a great reflection. Reflecting the change talk was missing. What might it look like, or how might it land if you reflected the change talk? Or, ooh, you just gave advice and permission, advice without permission. You just told that person what to do, and they kind of shrunk up, and then they didn't come back for their next appointment. Let's talk through that. So we know that people have to try, and they have to try it a lot of different ways and a lot of different times. So we need that experiential learning component. And that could be done in a full day workshop, or as we've said before, it can be done 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here in different paces. Some people thrive in large group settings with a lot of discussion and a lot of interaction. Some people get really, really anxious and they're like, don't make me practice in front of a group with somebody I don't know. I want to do it from the comfort of my home, my computer screen, or one-on-one. And so anything that really allows an environment where we emphasize, first off, it's okay to fail because you're not failing, you're learning. You're not failing your learning. When you try things and it doesn't go the way you want, that goes in the bank of experiential knowledge, and that is valuable. It's gold, and you're gonna use it to develop your skill further. I always tell people, I use the driving example, also playing guitar or piano. When you listen to someone trying to learn a musical instrument, it doesn't sound so pretty at first. And that's the thing with MI. People might feel like, ooh, this feels uncomfortable, or like, I'm not good at this, or I'm anxious. And yet, just like that guitar, that piano might not sound so good when someone's first practicing. It just takes practice, and then you start to feel it, you start to see the beauty of it, and everyone in the room gets a sense of it. And motivational conversation is so positive. It gets that like icky cringe out of your stomach for those tougher conversations about health behaviors. Um, so I'll pause there, see what other questions folks have, and if there are any follow-ups.
Reyna, do you have anything to add to about like microlearning and the benefits that you've seen from it or how to easily implement it or?
Well, yes to everything Mary said, right? I totally agree. One metaphor I often, as you can see, we're full of metaphors. I often say, you've been riding a bike this way for this many years, however long you've been in your job, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you've been riding a bike one way. And then you go to a motivational interviewing training and they say, okay, try it this way, try it a little bit differently. So just like Mary said, you're going to get on that bike and you're going to be like, this feels weird. This isn't usually how I do things. It might feel clunky. You might need to think before just kicking into autopilot, right? And that's one of the things I just really like to remind my learners that I get to experience learning MI with is it's okay to pause and think about what you're going to say next before you just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Sometimes we're uncomfortable with silence and we think that's going to make the people we work with uncomfortable with silence. But, it's really humbling. I've had a really humbling experiences when I say, I'm really trying to think of the right thing to say here. I have a question I want to ask, and I'm just trying to think of the right way to get it. To allow yourself a little bit of that buffer time to let the question load, right? To let yourself kick into a different gear that you're not usually tapped into. I might have gotten that. I speak Spanish as well, and my professional Spanish is not as professional sounding as my professional English. And I do that a lot in my Spanish conversations. I say, sometimes I struggle with my Spanish language. I might say something wrong, but feel free to correct me. And it works really well with people in that collaborative nature. So if you're learning something, if you have a cheat sheet in front of you and you want to glance at your cheat sheet to look at your affirmations or to look at your open questions, I would invite you to even name it. Say, I'm trying to learn this new thing. I'm trying to practice this new thing. Would it be okay with you if I look at my notes every once in a while? That can sometimes take some of the stress off of us trying to make it seem seamless or make it seem like we know what we're doing. And it makes this learning, the practicing of the learning, a much more human experience. And typically folks have a very human and natural and accepting reaction to that. It makes it seem like we're not so intimidating, which often isn't the case. We don't want to come in and sound intimidating, right? So that's just another idea I had.
Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing that. I really like the okay to fail, you're learning. That was really good. Something that I never thought about it as that way. Like it's just another learning experience. And so I really enjoyed that. And then one thing that we've definitely took in Iowa, and I'm so glad you said it, Mary, is like MI is complex skills and those complex skills take time. That you're not meant to do this overnight. And it's okay that, I like the idea of practicing one skill at a time just so that you can build your competency and your knowledge. But one of the really great things I love is these micro sessions, they build on that knowledge. You're taking those skills one at a time and building on them. One of the really things that we've enjoyed about Lyssn is the simulated roles and how to practice those with different people. And so to help with our skill development, we've also included that like in additional trainings, giving people those simulated vignettes to practice with that are really relevant to the people that they're seeing right now. And so that they have practice with those. So then when they do face the client with that, they're maybe not so nervous because they practice. And so thank you for both for talking about the bike and learning different ways. All really good feedback. And so there are some questions in the chat that I wanted to see that we could give time to, just because I know people, they're very engaged and they're asking. So I want to give them an opportunity to get these done. So one of the first ones that I saw is, so around for you, Reyna, the coding. So is code certain to fidelity methods like the MICA or to the fidelity tool of like Minty? And so what is Lyssn using to kind of code?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for those that are unfamiliar with those acronyms, there's different evaluation tools that have been created and some have been validated. The Mighty, the MISC, the MICA, all these different evaluation tools. Lyssn actually kind of uses a combination of several of these because we've sensed, well, the Mighty is the most validated one. And there's elements from it that are super practical, also from like other coding aspects as well. What we also really want to hone in on is that these are skills that are being evaluated, and there's thresholds that are recommended by these coding manuals that have been validated by research. And at the same time, we take into consideration the context, right? If you're not evaluating therapy sessions, you're evaluating caseworker conversations, right? And so those things are always really important to consider when you're using a coding manual that has been applied in other contexts, and even when you're interpreting the results. What do they mean for the types of conversations you're looking for and you're having?
Thank you for asking that. And this will be a question for both of you if you want to answer. But even using typical methods of asking people to tell you their barriers can create defensiveness. So focus on change in a positive way. Like, how do you do that?
Do you want to take it, Mary?
I'll start. You'll follow up with anything that I've forgotten because you're so good at that. So it's a little bit tricky. Sometimes people, when they start to learn, I'm either like, oh, like sustained talk bad, right? Sustained talk equals bad. Sustained talk is a really normal thing. So it's not necessarily bad. We just don't want to grow it. It exists and it exists for very real reasons. There are very real barriers that people have to change. Many of them very systemic, things they can't control. And MI can't fix unaffordable housing, trouble accessing healthcare, all of these, things like that. What MI can do is support motivation within the individual to take a one next step and a one next step and a one next step to navigate around barriers or through things or accomplish stuff that they are capable of within themselves. And so what we want to do is we want to recognize and validate those barriers and think about how to navigate around them. So imagining you're painting a picture, you're recognizing, there might be a river or a scary alligator, all these things in the way, and they're there. And we want to let the person know that we see them and we feel them and we're scared with them. And how can we walk alongside them to get around them to get where they want to go? And I'm closing my eyes because I'm such a visual person. And I'm imagining like asking this person, like, where do you want to go? Or knowing like, hey, this place over here, it's healthier, it's safer, it's more permanent, it's better for your well-being. How can we get there? And so a very practical way to do it is a skill in motivational interviewing called a double-sided reflection, where you acknowledge both the challenge and the change. So it might sound something like, oh, you have so many things in your way and you've hit so many roadblocks. And yet here you are in this appointment, still wanting to get to recovery, reduce your substance use, meet the judge's request, attend school, whatever that change goal is. So you acknowledge the barrier, you acknowledge what the change goal is or what that desire, that safer, that better well-being place is. You pause, you let that land.
Ooh.
Let it land. People's instinct in general is to ask a follow-up question like, well, how can we get there? Or where are we going? Or what are we doing? Offer the double-sided reflection. Here's the struggle. Here's where we want to go. Sit in that for a minute. Let the person talk. Let them respond. Let them think out loud. And then whatever they've thought out loud about is going to give you an idea of a really thoughtful place to go next, either an open-ended question or another reflection. So those double-sided reflections are a great tool to acknowledge the sustain and the change.
I love the double-sided reflection. I like to think of it as like again, the tool belt, right? It is that tool that's always going to be there when you don't know what to say and you're getting faced with some ambivalence, but you want to show empathy and keep the conversation going in the change direction. Time to use that double-sided reflection. And I think I wanted to, again, yes to everything Mary said. And I think one thing that really took me some time to learn and get comfortable with when I was learning motivational interviewing was sustained talk, right? Because in training, sometimes, like Mary said, we're taught don't go that way. Through coding, though, I've learned there's timing for it, right? And it's about how you can't avoid it. It's about how you handle it when you're faced with it. So I'll share a few things that I've learned from coding. One of the things that we know from research is that if your goal is to have a person keep talking with you and be open to considering a change, empathy has to be there. If empathy is not there, people are not, if like they don't feel validated in their experiences, they're likely not going to feel open to hearing what you have to say next. And so we can't get to the change talk part if we don't do that engaging. So sometimes you'll find yourself at the beginning of a session or a conversation doing some more validating of the sustained talk, and that's okay because you're building that engagement and you're building that empathy. You're having the person see and feel your empathy so that they can bring their guard down, which will set the pavement for the change talk conversation that will follow. If someone sits down and they share with you some barriers and you go right for the change talk, that's one good way to have them feel dismissed, right? So using that double-sided reflection or acknowledging some of that sustain at first, but making sure not to stay there, right, is the key. So sometimes at the beginning, you might see some more of that happening. And another thing that Mary mentioned was if you do ask about barriers, because that can give you some helpful information, it can tell you where you need to navigate next. So I'll tell folks, it's okay if you're going to ask, what are some things getting in the way? So long as you follow it up with, what are some things that you can do or we can do in our time together to help you figure something out to handle these difficult moments, right? So always bringing it back to change talk, even if we are going to explore some of those barriers. That can be very helpful when it comes to action planning. So again, and that can sometimes happen toward the end of a conversation. So a lot of it sometimes has to do with timing as well, which can be kind of hard to incorporate when you're first learning MI, but as you get to that like advanced beginner level that Mary was talking about, you can get a sense of, okay, I have 30 minutes with this person. I'm going to show make it a point to really be empathetic. And then by halfway through, I want to be trying to transition to the change talk for the most part, right? I'm not going to say that template works for all conversations, but for the most part, you want to be keeping both in mind, empathy and bringing it back to change.
Yeah, well, good. Thank you for those. So our next question would be, what are the biggest barriers you've seen when organizations try to move from a traditional MI training to more continuous micro-learning approaches? And what advice would you give them?
So, one of the challenges that I've often seen is the people who are making decisions about that move from like a traditional MI to a micro learning or a fidelity assessment, the people making the decisions aren't necessarily the people who are going to be doing the things. They're not going to be doing the trainings. They're not going to be in the everyday stuff. And so one idea is to involve those stakeholders in decision making. Involve the stakeholders in decision making and think about how it might be able to fit into what folks are already doing so that you're not creating an additional burden. Because as I shared in the beginning, and this isn't a newsflash to anyone, people are often already too many things to do, not enough time to do it. And so if we're thinking about how to do it, what are, number one, let's ask our staff, like, hey, we're thinking about shifting from, having professional development days to moving to these kind of, MI motivational moments quarterly or whatever. How, what are your thoughts on that? How can we fit that in? And then for you, thinking about how to fit it in again within the capacity. So is it something that can be done within a supervision session, within time that was already carved out for professional development? Are there ways to make it fun? Are there ways to affirm the efforts? Are there ways to motivate people? People love swag, people love prizes, so are the first 10 people to participate get a water bottle? I don't know. And you all know your agency's best. So what works within your culture? That is my thought. Because we don't want to just tell people this is what you're going to do and you have to do it, because that's actually the opposite of MI. People implement motivational interviewing in a non-motivational interviewing coherent way.
Yeah.
So you want to parallel the motivational process.
Yeah. And those parallels, it can look in so many different ways, right? Like Mary was saying, start from a place of collaboration. What do you want to spend time working on? What skills do you want to spend time working on? Because if I just throw the book at you and we go chapter by chapter, I don't know how fun or engaging that's going to be, right? But getting the intel, the perspective of the people that are going to be doing the work. I want to practice open questions. I need to practice affirmations, right? Giving them a menu of options to choose from and asking which would you like to focus on, which is a very great MI skill, but implementing that in the structure of the building the continuous learning, right? And another way I thought of that parallel process is when you're in those meetings, when you're in those small learning opportunities, continuing to model the motivational interviewing, right? So there's a structure called a motivational interviewing community of practice, where basically what we do is you get together a small group of people and you decide to either discuss a scenario or do a role play for 10 minutes. And it's very strengths based, meaning a big point, the biggest point is to affirm the learner and all the good things that they were doing. And then one piece of feedback for the learner that they can take and try in the next time, so that it's not a case of we're going around the table and everyone's telling this person what they could do better, because that doesn't feel good. I don't want 20 people telling me what I did wrong, but having 20 people tell me what I did right and then one person share one thing I could try next is more likely to have people feel like up for that experience and take away some learning. Actually create some really good group learning through that dynamic as well. So being affirming, asking those open-ended questions to dig for change, talk from the staff, like implementing MI as a supervisor, which we could probably spend a whole another hour talking about. But keeping that consistent, right, will help people, your staff, want to show up to these continuous learning moments and not make it feel like another mandatory thing.
Yeah, we've definitely seen great success with that in Iowa with modeling MI in our trainings. So like we have a whole training that's not anything to do with MI, but it's working with families. And our trainers model MI throughout. And people are like, oh, he just did a scaling question. Oh, wait, he just asked an open-ended question. Like they're picking up on the things. And I think that's making it more real for them, is that they're seeing a training that's not related to motivation or just working with families, but yet our trainers are doing MI. And then so then they get asked questions during the trainings. And so just modeling that behavior, I think it's been really something we've seen successful. So thank you for sharing that. And we're going to do a couple more questions. We've got about 10 minutes left of our webinar. So I'm going to do, let's see, one really quick thing that I struggled with finding out in Iowa. Just ran into this review. Where would I find some resources for Spanish families to do MI, like some Spanish handouts or Spanish materials that really support those families that we serve?
Yeah, the motivational interviewing website is chock full of resources, and at the same time, it's sometimes tricky to navigate, and so send us an email. Maybe we can get back to you with some more information. But I also do want to say, and this just goes across, I've worked with different Spanish groups across the country, and resources are hard to come by anyway. And in Spanish, they can be, or in other languages, they can be additionally hard. So if you feel a need for some of those resources, I would strongly advocate for you to advocate for those within your organization, and name those needs so that you can get that support, right? Because sometimes folks will say, we'll lump the Spanish speaking folks into an English training and it's the same. It's different, right? Because we need the space to practice the language. And so definitely advocate for those training resources and needs in your agency. And if there isn't that already, could there be some momentum to put some of those things together of the resources that you already have? Can we translate those, so that they're your own tools that are practical and useful to you?
All right. So I think we've got time for maybe one more. So some people are implementing FFPSA, and they just want to know some of the struggles that some of the families we serve, they just lack empathy. And so how can you use that MI with someone who, say, might have like an anti-personality disorder, or how do you really help those families to engage in that? And this might be a loaded question for the last one. But if you could give us a short little help with that.
Yeah, so many things. So first off, everyone is human. Everyone is human, and just like centering that in some way, shape, or form. I often, some of my trainings, I start by asking people like, think of a goal that you set that you struggled with, or a New Year's resolution you never attained. And so, or imagine the worst day you ever had where you did the most embarrassing or thing or made the biggest mistake ever. And imagine now that you have to talk about that with 4 different agencies and 17 different providers for the next 3 years, right? And so just a little bit of kind of foundational setting sometimes can help to work with what might be those more challenging clients, patients, families, because some of us, when we've been in the work for so long, in order to survive, we've built up a little bit of a thick skin or a shell, and so and so just kind of having that foundation can be really helpful. And another piece to this is it goes back to what I shared in the beginning, that not MI isn't a hammer and not everything is a nail. So there may be some situations where MI as an intervention isn't a fit, and that's okay. And when I say MI as an intervention, I mean those relational skills where we're engaging, we're being thoughtful, we're being empathetic, and we're also guiding towards change talk. In some instances where MI isn't in a fit, somebody might not be in a place where they can be guided. Just you can reflect and you can ask questions. Or to Raina's point, sometimes silence is golden. Just sit in that space. You don't have to determine if someone's lying or figure out a way around their mental health diagnoses or their state. Sometimes people aren't in a state where they can be motivated. And so we just reflect, we sit in the space with them, and we meet them where they are. And maybe the door opens for us to kind of take a few steps forward, or maybe we just need to sit in that space for a little bit. And one thing I will say about learning motivational interviewing, and I shared that I really started to learn it well, both, like Raina, as a researcher, but also when I was working in a residential treatment center, which was a hard environment, high turnover, high burnout. One thing that MI did for me after I learned it well, I had made some mistakes, I had felt the uncomfortableness, I had practiced with embarrassment. One thing I felt was lighter because I realized that responsibility of change for someone did not lie on me. I was not playing tug of war. I was not pulling. I was not feeling like I was carrying somebody over the finish line anymore. I could confidently and comfortably go into a session, try and support their change, and at the end of the day, say to myself, what they do is their choice. And I am not responsible if they make a choice and something bad happens. I will feel it. I will feel it as a human and as emotion, but I ultimately am not responsible for pulling or pushing them into change.
Thank you, Mary, for that. Was really good. I think sometimes I've been doing this work for 15 years, but I forget, like, think of my worst day, the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And now have 5 people enter in and I've got to share it with all of them. And I have all these people now involved in my life. Like, that's a nice level set to remember of, like, when you're working with these families. And then I also like how you ended it. It's not my responsibility if they change or not. And so giving myself that permission to just, I've done everything I can do. I've worked with this family. I've done all these things. And if they're not changing, that's not on me. And so acknowledging that's, thank you. That was really good. And so we've got about a couple of minutes left of our webinar today. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank Mary and Reyna so much for sharing your insights and your expertise with us today. It's been a really valuable conversation, and I hope it's been valuable for our participants as well. I really love how we're supporting professionals engage with families and support that meaningful change. And I love when we do webinars like this. I'd also like to thank APHSA for hosting today's webinar and for their continued leadership in supporting learning and innovation in across human services fields. And then I also want to extend a special thanks to our partners at Lyssn. They have been wonderful to work with here in Iowa, and we appreciate their collaboration and commitment to strengthening a motivational interviewing practice. They have been a wonderful partner, and I'm so thankful for their expertise and their knowledge to walk through us with implementation. And then I just want to thank everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate the work that you're doing every day to support families and communities. We understand the work is hard, but you're doing a good job, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and listen and learn and ask some wonderful questions of Reyna and Mary.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to all the organizers. We hope this has been helpful.